Okay, welcome back to Kilat Chaverim after our 1 week hiatus, rejoining the Shem Mishmuel on Parshas Matos. Okay, so the first topic in Parshas Matos is the topic of Nedarim. And Nedarim are a fascinating thing. The Sfasema says the Lashon of Neder is from the Lashon of Dira, meaning to dwell, meaning that a person is able to take an object and through the power of speech give it a different status, right? We are able to, with our speech, declare that something is forbidden to me, even though it's totally allowed. And that becomes my halachic reality. It isn't so for someone else's. With a shvuah, I'm able to obligate myself to do something that is not part of the obligations of the Torah. But suddenly there's a Torah power that obligates me to fulfill that shvuah, that oath that I took. So the Shem Mishmuel speaks about the introduction here, that the parsha is called Matos, and it starts off, Vayidaber Moshe el Roshei HaMatos. That's a very unique introduction. That Moshe spoke to the heads of the Shvatim, the tribes, but here they're called the Matos. Now, there are different times in traveling where it's called Materu Uvein Mate Shimon. Why is it called a Mate? Why was this parsha particularly given through and to the heads of the Matos? So Rashi says he gave particular kavod to the Nasim here, because there's a concept of hafarat nedarim. Okay, aside from the wondrous ability of a human being to make a neder and to transform something, that neder is able to be undone by what's called a yochid mumche. You don't need a beis din even. You need one person who is expert in the laws of nedarim, and if the person comes and wants to explain, and it's very complicated halachas, and I was present when I saw some of these things happening, that the person explains, had I known that this or that would happen, I never would have taken this neder upon myself. So then that yochid mumche, that one expert in the halachas of nedarim, is able to cancel the neder. Okay, so therefore he said, since these are the people who were in charge of canceling nedarim, the Nisim, those people were the spiritual heads of Am Yisrael, it came through them. Now, he said his father, the Avnei Nezer, asked, he said, but that doesn't make so much sense. He says the neder itself, which is the main topic, being able to make a neder if a person says that whatever chocolate will be forbidden to him for 30 days, or something like that, that doesn't require Nisim. That doesn't require the Yochid Mumche. The person's able to do that himself. It's only the aftermath of a neder in a case in which a person wants to have that neder canceled, that's when you need the Nisim. So why is it that what Rashi describes, that the parsha of neder was given over to the Roshei HaMatos? It seems that somehow it depends upon them. So the Shem Mishmuel says, listen to something he describes as a davar nechmad, a very precious thing that his father said. Let's step back a second and say, how in the world does the Torah give us the power to make a neder? We have a concept in the Torah of lo tosifun. You're not allowed to add on mitzvahs. So how is it a person can make a neder or a shvuah that suddenly makes something forbidden to him that the Torah didn't forbid, obligates him to do something that the Torah didn't obligate? He says the only way we're able to do that, it's not considered that you added on a new mitzvah in the Torah, because it's entirely different. It's apples and oranges. A mitzvah in the Torah is eternal. A neder is something that can be canceled by this yochid mumche, by this expert in nedarim. So therefore he says, our entire ability to make nedarim is dependent on the ability of that chacham to cancel the neder. That's why they're truly at the center of the parsha of nedarim, and that's why they're there in the beginning. That is what he brings from his father, the Avnei Nezer. The Shem Mishmuel says, I would like to add on something else as well. He says, where does the power come to make a neder? And here, this is really one of the windows of the power of speech that we have. Many people get into this crisis when they see the unkelus that's brought down in the beginning of Bereshis, where it says, Vayia Adam lenefesh chaya, and unkelus says, L'ruach mamalala. And teachers in school always said that shows that only the human being has the power of speech, not the animals. But then you watch a few National Geographics, and you see Coco the chimp, who has a vocabulary of like 1,000 things, and the dance of the bees, and the songs of the whales, and all the birds. You say everybody's got their communication. And in fact, we see in Torah sources, Chazal describes Shlomo Melech being able to know the language of all these different creations. So what does that mean, that only the human being has that power of speech? What we mean is not speech just to be able to communicate what you want for supper. We mean speech which is transformative. Words that change the world. That is what was given to Adam. He says we have the ability to make hektish, right? That's to dedicate something which will now become dedicated to the use of the Beis HaMikdash only. Any item that a person wants, he can do that. Now, how does a person have the ability to do that? Obviously, speech is coming from your mouth. He says the mouth is a kli shores. He says the mouth is a vessel, just like the different vessels in the Beis HaMikdash. When you would have a vessel that would hold the oil that would be used for the Korban Mincha, when you put the oil into that vessel, the oil becomes kadosh. So too with wine, so too with kemach. He says, Rabbeinu Yonah in Shari Tshuva says that our mouth is a kli shores. And if our mouth is with kedusha, with holiness as it should be, so the words that come out of it have kedusha, right? So therefore, that's why it describes, when it warns us not to transgress the words that we've said, not to go over something that we've promised, or certainly a neder that we've made. It calls it lo yachel devaro, yud chet lamed, which is a lashon of chulin, profane. So that means the default of your speech is kadosh. Your words are kadosh. If you mistreat them, that's viewed as profaning something which is kadosh. Okay, so therefore he says, this is this tremendous power that we have. But we're going to be practical. People are going to ask, how many of us retain the kedusha of our mouths, and for how long? The Chofetz Chaim, in his introduction to the Sefer, speaking about why taking care against lashon hara and other types of forbidden speech is so important, is because Hashem designed it that the same mouth that we use for all sorts of things is the mouth that we use for Torah and Tefillah. And he says a person has to realize it could very well be that you're trying to daven with all of your strength, but you've spoiled your equipment, right? If you imagine you have a surgeon who's about to do surgery, and he's got the finest surgical scalpel, but meanwhile he wants to have a snack before the surgery, so he uses it to slice up his pastrami sandwich. It can be the finest scalpel, but it's now contaminated, right? This is not going to be a healthy experience. So he says, once again, if that's the power of nedarim, and every Jew has the power to make a neder, every Jew has the power to make a neder, how can it be if it's based on this qualitative idea that our mouth is a kli shores, is a kadosh? So he explains the following, right? And he even brings Rashi in Maseches Avodah Zarah that if a kli shores became tameh, it needs to be rededicated. It needs to receive the Shem and Amishcha again. So it seems like the previous kedusha is gone. He says it's all based on the fact that Am Yisrael are one. He says all of us are guf echad. Kol Yisrael mu'uchadim zeh bazeh. We're all included, one with the other. Kol ish dovek b'misha gadol mimenu. We're all connected to those who are greater than us, ad gedoli ukedoshi Yisrael, until the greatest and holiest people that are there in every generation. So he says that's why in the Ketores, right, in that incense which is brought in the Beis HaMikdash, you have one spice which is called the chelbana. And the chelbana, it says, did not smell good. And it represented Jews who were sinners. And yet they're included together in this mix. And the Ketores in Aramaic, keter, is a lashon of kesher, of like a knot. It's that which connects us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When all the Jews are connected together, and they all are, so then that works. He says, once again, we learned this in a previous parsha, the Nesim, right? Why are Nesim, we said, called Nesim? They're not Nisuin, they're not people who are raised up, they're people who are supposed to raise others up. Here he explains why they're called Roshei Hamatos, the head of a staff. The word mata is an interesting thing. A staff that you use to walk with, a staff that you use to lead, but a mata is also used to tilt things, to direct things. The word lintot in Hebrew means to tilt this way or that way. It's used sometime, you'll see, near me there are a bunch of Bedouins with sheep, and you see they use a stick to guide them, keep them on their path or such. So he says, a mata, the purpose of the Nesim is matin es elyonim lifnot latachtonim. They are mata, those who are spiritually higher in Am Yisrael, towards those who are lower than them. The task of a Nasi is to make sure that all of Am Yisrael will be able to benefit from each other. Now, he says, if a Nasi does this properly, and he's maniach dargim shelehem umashpilin umatin es atzon lepshute Yisrael. So here, he used the word mata in a very interesting way. Not the idea that they have a stick with which they try to direct Am Yisrael. They're mata themselves. They tilt themselves, they bend themselves over to the simplest of Am Yisrael. And then there's what's called a midah keneged midah, a corresponding response from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu nami maniach es elyonim umarkin shchinosel v'shochin b'toch Yisrael afilu shem tmeim. So if these Nesim, those Roshei Hamatos, if they understand that their task is to be noteh, to turn towards those who have less kedusha than them, less knowledge than them, and to benefit them, so too HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns and bends towards us. Right? There was a story about a chassid who he got a bracha from his Rebbe, and he started doing well, and he started giving tzedakah. And when he got really wealthy, so he started to figure, I want to be a little bit more diligent with my investments. Tzedakah, it's like you have stocks that are grade A stocks and B stocks. It says, I want to give tzedakah to the best of the best. I want people who are holy, Talmidei Chachamim, and that's who I'm going to give my tzedakah to. And suddenly his business started failing, and all these things started going wrong. And he came to his Rebbe, he said, Rebbe, what's happening? Right, I decided that I'm really going to try to be super excellent in the midst of tzedakah and to give to the best and most deserving people. So he said, what can I tell you? He says, before you used to give to all sorts of people, no matter who they were, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to you, even though you are who you are. Right now, he says, you're getting fussy. You say, I only want to give to people who are special. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is reflecting that with you as well. So this is what he says. The Nesim, if they're Roshei Hamatos, if they tilt toward the others, they're able to do it. And it says, Matos, we use a plural lashon, because there are two types of hatayot, he calls it, two types of tilting in Am Yisrael. He says there are some yeshematinat el yonim letachtonim. There are some tzaddikim that their job, their avoda, is bringing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, His Shechina, close and deep down to those of us who are found in the lower places. That's one aspect, and that's what he described in the beginning. Those Nesim who are mateh to those who need, and that brings the Shechina down to all of them. Some matinat hatachtonim le'elyonim. They cause the people who are down here to tilt toward that which is above them. Like it says in Melachim Aleph, lahatos levavenu elov, to tilt our heart towards Him. Now in the Zohar HaKadosh, he quoted this before, we've mentioned it other times, Moshe Rabbeinu was called Shushbina de Malka. Shushbina de Malka means the one who accompanies the king. Okay, Shushbinin, like at the wedding, Shushbinin are those who accompany the Chassan and Kala. Aaron is Shushbina de Matronisa. Aaron is the Shushbin of the queen. So he says these are the two actions we're describing. Moshe Rabbeinu, he's Kirev es Hashem Yisbarach Yisrael. He brought HaKadosh Baruch Hu close to Am Yisrael. The Aaron, Kirev es Yisrael Hashem Yisbarach. Aaron brought Am Yisrael up to Hashem. This is Mate Moshe and Mate Aaron. What's common to both of them, he says, Shneim hinichu dargin shelehem b'shvil Yisrael. Both of them leave their madrega, don't accomplish all the things they could have accomplished for themselves if they remained in isolation, doing their spiritual avoda without caring for others. Both of them leave that avoda in order to make this connection between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael. He says in the Medrash, Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayar b'sivloso. When Moshe Rabbeinu was in Egypt and he saw the suffering of Am Yisrael, B'lozo b'nosho b'yosi aglili yomer, Roa masui godol al koton or masui koton al godol, masui ish al isho, masui ish al ish. The Egyptians had all sorts of psychological torture in the type of slave labor they would give them. He saw that a heavy load was given to a person who was smaller or younger, right? And while they gave something lighter to someone who was stronger, a task for a man to a woman to a man. So what Moshe Rabbeinu would do is even though he was a royal prince, so to speak, he abandoned that, and he would go and help them out, sort out so that each person at least had something which was appropriate for them that they could handle. And he did it under the guise as if he was helping Paro. He was going in there, so to speak, as an overseer of Paro. Hey, you, why are you carrying that? Give that to this one. You give that to that one. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Ato hinachta asokecho v'lachta liros b'tzarin shel Yisrael. You left your own asek, your own development, and you went to see the tzar of Am Yisrael. Nahagta behem minag achim, and you treated them as your brothers. Ani minech esel yonim v'tachtonim v'adaber imoch. I am going to abandon all that which is above and which is below and to speak to you. It's a very powerful book written about World War II, about the concentration camps, called, what's it called? About the dragon? To Vanquish the Dragon. It's the memoir of really a few of the young women who learned in Beis Yaakov in Krakow under Sarah Schneer and their experiences in the camps. And they mentioned that there was one woman who was in charge in the concentration camp of giving out the clothing. You would come and you would give clothing, and they waited online, and this woman would scream at everyone, "Don't take that, take this, give me that, you take this." And she was screaming as if she was some kind of overseer. But they realized that what she was doing was she was really trying to give the best clothing to those who needed it in the best way, right? To make sure that everybody was taken care of. A similar action to what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing over there. Now he says, we should know that Moshe Rabbeinu, everything he got, when Hashem says, I'm going to abandon everything and speak to you, the speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu was for Am Yisrael. When Moshe Rabbeinu, so to speak, brought down the Dibur of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he was bringing it for Am Yisrael. How do we know? Very simple proof. And after the Meraglim, Hashem didn't speak to Moshe Rabbeinu. It was lo nisyached hadibur leMoshe Rabbeinu during all those years. Right? It's just like after Chet HaEgel, Hashem told him, Lech Red, go down. Rashi brings down, Red migduloscha, go down from your exalted position. Did I give you that position if not for them? So this is how Moshe Rabbeinu, in doing his avoda and causing Hashem to speak to him, he was bringing the Shechina close to us. Now Aaron, hiniach darga shalo shoye ish merkava. Right? He describes Aaron HaKohen as a ish merkava. Aaron HaKohen, who could go into the Kodesh Kodashim, who would do the avoda. Aaron was involved in the loftiest things. And he would go and he would be osek b'pshutei advarim lasas shalom bein Yisrael, to help make peace among the squabbling Jews. Anyone who's ever tried doing that for a bit knows what an avoda that is. Right? Therefore, he was chosen to be the Kohen Gadol, who brings shalom bein elyonim v'tachtonim, the kasher es Yisrael avim shebashamayim. That's Mate Aaron. And now he says an interesting thing historically. He said, Zeho yanoig b'chol gedoli v'tzadikei Yisrael. These two different paths and two different approaches existed throughout among Gedolei Yisrael. There are some who have the midah of Moshe, and some who have the midah of Aaron. Meaning, and this he actually says it could be that the different pairs we've had in history, right, that we would have, let's say, the Melech and the Kohen Gadol, the Nasi and the Av Beis Din. It could be that those were the heads of the two different forms of avodah that were there. And it's important to realize, because sometimes people will see one tzaddik who's involved in his avodah and not so involved with the people in a visible, tangible way. But that tzaddik could be working, so to speak, the Mate Moshe. He's bringing the Shekhinah to Am Yisrael and helping us benefit from that. Other tzaddikim are out there as the Mate Aaron, elevating Am Yisrael in that way. So he says this is the way of the Nesiim. In order to join Am Yisrael to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Am Yisrael, and through them, every Jew retains that power of his words in order to be able to make a neder. Even if he himself has messed up, so to speak, with his mouth, because he's connected to those tzaddikim, so therefore he's able to do it. Now he says we can understand how this Yochid Mumche is able to undo a neder. Because in reality, the neder itself all depends on them. Right? If you have something, if you have a structure that's standing on one item, so if you pull out that item, the structure goes down. So he says the ability of Am Yisrael to make nedarim is there in that way, similar to what we find in the Gemara many times, that if somebody did an act of kiddushin, to be mekadesh an isha, but he didn't do it in a way that the chachamim wanted, so he says doesn't work, because everyone was mekadesh adaita the rabbanon mekadesh. When we say hareat mekudeshet li b'tabatzu kedat Moshe v'Yisrael, that means it's all depending on the fact that the chachamim want this to happen. If it's not in the way that the chachamim wants, so the rug is pulled out from under it. So this is that aspect of the nedarim and the power of the nedarim that we have. So we learn from here a few things. Number one, our power of speech. Speech is real. Words are real. And even words that aren't said to someone else are words that are powerful. There's a beautiful posuk in Mishlei which says, Maves v'chayim b'yad halashon. There's death and life in the hands of the tongue, so to speak. Now, people tend to emphasize in their drushas the idea of maves b'yad halashon. Right? You can kill somebody with words. You can destroy their reputation. You can destroy their livelihood. You can even lead them to suffer physical violence or murder through words. But you have to realize that second side as well. Chayim b'yad halashon. That words have the ability to bring life. They have the power to bring life. The fact that a neder is something which is so real, our Torah is called Torah's Chaim. And here, what your mouth is able to do is to able to change the nature of something in this world with the power of Torah. So when you use that towards somebody else, towards bringing life to another person, that's a tremendous gift which is there. Onas Devarim, I think we mentioned in the previous year, words that hurt someone. The Gemara describes it as the reason that's worse even than overcharging somebody with money, because Onas Dvarim is begufo. It's in the person themselves. You've minimized the person with the words. But the opposite, the beautiful perush of the Hebrew word for encouragement is the oded, which means you make the person more. The tzedakah, the chesed, which can be given by words, is something that anyone can do. Right? A lot of times you play this fantasy, if I won the Mega Millions lottery, what would I do with the money? And you're giving it out here and giving it out there. But you didn't even buy a ticket. But you have the ability to give with your words. And Chazal point out, kind words are needed by aniyim and ashirim. Even wealthy people need a kind word, sometimes more than other people, because they can't even believe that anyone likes them. They just think that they're after their money, right? So the idea that you can help a person feel good in all sorts of different ways is a very big key, and you have to know to use it. I got Musar from an Arab gentleman once, and I accepted it. He was right, and I tried to go on it. I was visiting somebody in the hospital, and the hospitals have a couple of beds. So I went through and I visited my friend that I was visiting. And as I came out, so he said to me, he says, Lama lo omrim li refuah shlema? Why not say to me refuah shlema? I'm not a ben adam, right? I'm not a person. 100%. That's a power that you have, right? A person should do. A person should be able to give in any way that you can. Rav Moshe Feinstein Zatzal said that he was uncomfortable a bit when people started coming to him for brachas. He was a posuk. He really didn't. But number one, he brought a source in Chazal that people would go to those who taught Torah and Paskin halachas for brachas. But he said he also thought the following. He said, a person's tzara, a person's trouble is like a lock. And when you look at a key that we put into a lock, the key is made with all sorts of little bumps and ridges. And it just takes that one extra little bump sometime to complete what has to be done to be able to turn the lock. So he says, perhaps I have that in my bracha, and that's why Chazal said, the olam, right? Al tehei birkas hedyot kala beinecha. Don't let the bracha of a simple person be taken lightly in your eyes, right? Our power of bracha is there, is real, and we have to try to see and do what we can. There was a wedding that Rav Moshe went to, and he came to this wedding. It was not a typical time that he was going to a wedding. The person who drove him kind of got the instruction by surprise, and he came to the wedding, and people asked him, "Oh, what are you doing here?" He says, "I'm a relative of the Kala," and amazed they hadn't known the Kala is a relative of Moshe Feinstein, and they sat up at the table, and everybody was coming up to tell him Mazel Tov. And then before he went, so this wedding had a mechitza for the dancing, so he asked to call over the Kala, and he poured brachas on her, and she was crying. And this was soon after he got there. Even he did that. So afterwards, people asked him, how are you related? What was going on with this wedding? He says, this young woman came to me, and she said that before her wedding, she's from Yerushalayim, and her family, for whatever reason, weren't able to come over for the wedding. Her chassan's family is a very well-known family, a very large family, and she felt like a nobody because everybody's going to be coming over to her chassan's family, and all their well-known relatives and all their friends are going to be piling in, and she was nobody without anybody. So Rav Moshe said, we're all relatives. We're all relatives. There's no Jew who's not a relative. So I came. Now, why did I call her over to give her the brachas? Because she had asked me to come, and I said I would, but I didn't want her to have to worry, did he really come or not, and only find out at the end of the wedding. I wanted her to know right away that I came so that she would feel good about it. This idea of being able to bring life to people with your words, right? Being able, just that statement, that I'm there, I'm your relative. Now, Rosh Hashiva, Baron Shechter Shlita, maybe once he never really traveled away for Shabbos. He was either in the yeshiva in Brooklyn or when the yeshiva moved up to the Catskills in the summer. One Shabbos he was gone. And when I asked where he was, it seemed that he was in Minnesota. Right? Once he's going, it's an interesting destination. I asked around a little bit more, and somebody I knew from Minnesota confirmed this, that there was someone in Minnesota, a Ger Tzedek, who had come to visit the Rosh Hashiva at one point. This was years before. And he said, I don't look forward to family simchas with anticipation, because at a family simcha, usually people have relatives coming. And I'm not going to have relatives, or at least Jewish relatives, coming. So the Rosh Hashiva told him at the time, I'll be your relative. And he kept that up. When he got the invitation, he went to Minnesota. Our ability to do this, Nedarim seem technical, halachic, right? You make this thing usher, getting hataras Nedarim, and Chazal warn us not to be very careful with Nedarim. I know people who've messed around with the Nedarim and got in trouble. A young woman who made a diet based on Nedarim. It was very hard for her to get out of that, especially because she was happy that she lost the weight that she did. I knew one big Talmud Chacham who actually said he used a very limited form of neder to help him break the habit of smoking. Right, but don't try this at home, folks. Right, it's a very thing, but it's simply a projection of the power of our speech, and that it has kedusha, that it has power, that our mouth is a kli sharis. Certainly, the more we're able to protect our mouths, the more powers our words have, and certainly at least realize that by our connection to the tzaddikim of Am Yisrael, whose mouths are a kli sharis, so we are able to connect in and tap in with that, and hopefully to use that power in the right way. And hopefully our lives will be one of Chaim B'yad HaLashon, that everything that comes out of our mouths will bring life to all those around us. A good week and a good Shabbos.